The television screens flickered to life across Manhattan, each one broadcasting the same devastating headline: Ronan Sterling, the billionaire's secret exposed. In Times Square, crowds gathered beneath the massive digital billboards, their faces illuminated by the harsh glow of breaking news alerts. Coffee shops fell silent as patrons stared at their phones, watching the empire of one of America's most powerful men crumble in real time. Inside the gleaming towers of Sterling Industries, employees huddled in conference rooms, their whispered conversations creating a low hum of disbelief. Stock prices plummeted on trading floors as investors scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal. In penthouses and boardrooms across the city, phones rang incessantly, lawyers, publicists, business partners all demanding answers that no one could provide. The footage played on repeat: Ronan Sterling, the untouchable billionaire who had built his fortune from nothing, now exposed in ways that would destroy everything he had created. His perfectly crafted image, the ruthless businessman who never showed weakness, shattered like glass against concrete. The media feeding frenzy had begun, and there would be no mercy. In exclusive restaurants where he once commanded respect, his name became poison on people's lips. Former allies turned their backs, afraid that association might taint their own carefully maintained reputations. The charity galas that once courted his donations now scrambled to remove his name from their donor walls. Every achievement, every success, every moment of triumph in his life suddenly meant nothing. But beneath the chaos of collapsing stock prices and severed partnerships, beneath the endless stream of commentary from financial analysts and social media vultures, there existed a truth that none of them understood. This wasn't a story about corporate greed or financial misconduct. This wasn't about power corrupted or ambition gone too far. This was about something far more dangerous than any hostile takeover or market manipulation. This was about the one thing Ronan Sterling had never factored into his meticulously planned life: the devastating, transformative power of unexpected love. But how does a love story unravel into scandal that tears down empires overnight? The answer lies not in boardrooms or bank vaults, but in the dangerous territory of the human heart. Ronan Sterling had spent 42 years building walls that no one could breach, constructing a life where vulnerability had no place. He had mastered the art of control, over markets, over people, over his own emotions, until the day she walked into his world and made him question everything he thought he knew about power and protection. Some might call it fate. Others would say it was inevitable, that a man who lived his entire life behind masks would eventually meet someone who could see through them all. But those who truly understood what happened between Ronan Sterling and the woman who would cost him everything knew it was neither fate nor inevitability. It was a choice, the most dangerous choice a man in his position could make: to love without reservation in a world that weaponizes every weakness. He lost everything in 24 hours, not because of greed, but because of love. Think about that for a moment. In a world where billionaires fall from grace over embezzlement schemes and insider trading, where empires crumble under the weight of corruption and avarice, Ronan Sterling's destruction came from something infinitely more human. He didn't steal. He didn't cheat shareholders or manipulate markets. He simply loved someone in a way that made him vulnerable, and in his world, vulnerability was the one luxury he couldn't afford. If you've ever loved someone but feared the truth could cost you everything, this story is for you, because we all carry secrets. We all have parts of ourselves we hide, afraid that exposure might cost us the life we've built. But what happens when keeping those secrets means losing the one person who makes that life worth living? What happens when the price of protection becomes higher than the cost of truth? The stakes couldn't have been higher. An empire built over decades, hanging by a thread. Trust shattered by betrayal from the one person who should have protected him. And at the center of it all, a love so profound it made him willing to risk everything: his reputation, his fortune, his carefully constructed life, for just the possibility of something real. Was his destruction his curse, or his freedom? That's the question that haunts this story, because sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover what truly matters. Sometimes the empire you've built becomes the prison that keeps you from the life you actually want to live. And sometimes the person who destroys you is also the one who saves you. Before we dive deeper into this tale of love, power, and devastating truth, I want to thank you for joining me today. Whether you're a returning listener who's been with us through countless stories of passion and betrayal, or you're discovering rich billionaires' romance stories for the first time, your presence here means everything. If you're captivated by stories where love collides with power, where hearts worth billions can still break like anyone else's, then make sure to subscribe to our channel. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story about the dangerous games played when romance meets wealth, when desire challenges control, and when truth becomes the most expensive commodity of all. Because Ronan Sterling's story is just beginning, and trust me, you won't want to miss a single moment of what comes next. Willow Ridge sat nestled between rolling hills and endless farmland, a town so small that everyone knew not just your name, but your grandmother's maiden name and what you ordered at the diner every Sunday morning. Main Street stretched for exactly 6 blocks, lined with storefronts that had been run by the same families for generations. The red brick buildings wore their age like badges of honor, their windows reflecting the slow rhythm of a life untouched by corporate mergers and hostile takeovers. At the heart of it all stood Mabel's Diner, a chrome and vinyl testament to the 1950s that refused to acknowledge the passage of time. The coffee was strong, the pie was legendary, and the booth in the back corner had heard more confessions than the church 2 blocks over. Every morning at 6 sharp, the regulars filed in, farmers before heading to the fields, shop owners before opening their stores, retired teachers who had nothing but time and stories to share. The library occupied the old Carnegie Building on Oak Street, its limestone facade and arched windows speaking of an era when small towns invested in grandeur. Inside, the hardwood floors creaked with every step, and the smell of old paper mixed with lemon polish created an atmosphere of timeless learning. The reading room, with its green-shaded lamps and heavy wooden tables, provided sanctuary for those seeking escape from the constant observation that came with small-town life. As the sun set each evening, the farmland surrounding Willow Ridge transformed into a canvas of gold and amber. The wheat fields swayed in the breeze like an ocean of grain, while the old water tower cast its long shadow across the landscape. These were the moments when the town seemed to exhale, when the beauty of simple things could make you forget that beyond those hills lay a world of complexity and compromise. But Willow Ridge had another face, one that revealed itself in hushed conversations, over garden fences and meaningful glances exchanged in the grocery store aisles. This was a place where privacy was a foreign concept, where your business became community property the moment you stepped outside your door. The town thrived on information: who was dating whom, whose business was struggling, whose child had disappointed them by moving to the city. In Willow Ridge, whispers carried more weight than shouts. They started innocently enough. Mrs. Henderson mentioning she saw the Patterson boys' truck parked outside the Wilson girls' house past midnight. By noon, the story had grown legs, evolved details, taken on a life of its own. These whispers could be harmless, even helpful, alerting neighbors to someone in need, celebrating quiet victories, sharing the small joys that punctuated daily life. But whispers could also destroy. They could turn speculation into fact, transform innocent actions into scandalous behavior, create truths out of assumptions. The town had seen it before: reputations ruined by rumors, relationships shattered by suspicion, lives derailed by stories that bore only passing resemblance to reality. The same network that provided comfort and community could become a weapon, wielded sometimes carelessly, sometimes with deliberate intent. The irony wasn't lost on those who had lived in Willow Ridge long enough to understand its rhythms. The very closeness that made the town special also made it dangerous. Love thy neighbor, yes, but also know that thy neighbor was watching, listening, forming opinions based on fragments of information glimpsed through kitchen windows and overheard in checkout lines. This duality defined Willow Ridge, a place of genuine warmth and suffocating scrutiny, where kindness and judgment walked hand in hand down Main Street. It was into this world of contradictions that 2 very different lives would collide, setting in motion events that would prove just how powerful those whispers could become. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. While Manhattan measured time in stock market bells and conference calls, Willow Ridge marked its days by the whistle of the grain elevator and the changing shifts at the hardware store. Where city dwellers rushed past each other without making eye contact, Willow Ridge residents couldn't buy milk without a 15-minute conversation about the weather, their health, and their third cousin's new baby. The visual language of the two worlds spoke volumes. In the city, glass and steel reached toward the sky, each building trying to outdo its neighbor in height and grandeur. In Willow Ridge, the tallest structure was the grain silo, and the most impressive building was the courthouse, built in 1892 and still serving its purpose with quiet dignity. Power dressed differently here, too. In Manhattan, it wore designer suits and arrived in private cars. In Willow Ridge, it wore overalls and work boots, manifesting in the ability to bring in a good harvest or keep the local businesses afloat through another tough winter. Wealth wasn't measured in stock portfolios but in land owned, in the health of your cattle, in the respect earned through decades of honest work. The pace of life reflected these differences. Where city dwellers scheduled their days in 15-minute increments, Willow Ridge operated on what locals called farm time, a rhythm dictated by seasons and sunlight rather than arbitrary deadlines. Lunch wasn't grabbed on the go but savored at Mabel's counter, where the daily special came with a side of local news and friendly debate. Coraline Mitchell had lived her entire 26 years in Willow Ridge, but her mind had always wandered beyond the town limits. She worked at the library, surrounded by stories of distant places and different lives, each book a window into worlds she could only imagine. Her apartment above the old pharmacy was cramped but cozy, every surface covered with notebooks filled with half-finished stories and dreams too big for small-town life. She had inherited her mother's delicate features and her father's stubborn streak, a combination that made her both lovely and frustrating to those who thought they knew what was best for her. While her high school classmates had married their sweethearts and settled into predictable patterns, Coraline remained stubbornly single, claiming she was waiting for a love story worth writing about. Her days followed a comfortable routine, opening the library at 9, helping Mrs. Garrett find another mystery novel, reading to the children during Saturday story time, closing up at 6 and walking home past familiar faces who had known her since birth. But her evenings belonged to her writing, to the characters who lived more boldly than she dared, who took risks she only imagined. Coraline understood Willow Ridge in a way that only a native could, its beauty and its limitations, its comfort and its constraints. She loved the town, even as she felt trapped by it, appreciated its simplicity, even as she yearned for complexity. Her stories reflected this tension, painting small-town life with both affection and honesty, capturing the poetry in ordinary moments, while acknowledging the prose of daily frustration. Ronan Sterling arrived in Willow Ridge on a Tuesday afternoon, driving a rented pickup truck instead of his usual Bentley, wearing jeans and work boots that still showed their store creases. At 35, he had everything the world said mattered: wealth that bordered on obscene, power that opened any door, a name that commanded respect in boardrooms across the globe. He also had an exhaustion that went bone deep, a weariness that no amount of money could cure. He had told no one where he was going, leaving behind a carefully crafted lie about needing time to review an acquisition in the Midwest. The truth was simpler and more complicated. He needed to disappear, to find a place where the Sterling name meant nothing, where he could walk down a street without calculating the cost of every interaction. The farmhouse he rented sat 5 miles outside town, a modest 2-story structure that hadn't seen updates since the 1970s. To Ronan, accustomed to penthouse views and smart home technology, it felt like stepping back in time. The silence unnerved him at first. No traffic, no sirens, just the wind through the cornfields and the distant lowing of cattle. He had inherited his father's sharp features and his mother's dark eyes, a combination that photography loved and boardroom opponents feared. But here, in flannel and denim, with stubble darkening his jaw, he looked like just another man trying to make sense of his life. The locals noticed him, of course. Strangers were rare in Willow Ridge, but his cover story of being a writer researching small-town life seemed to satisfy their initial curiosity. What Ronan couldn't explain, even to himself, was why he had chosen Willow Ridge. He had spread a map across his desk and pointed randomly, letting chance decide his destination. Or maybe it wasn't a chance at all. Maybe some part of him recognized that he needed the opposite of everything he had known, needed simplicity to counteract complexity, needed quiet to drown out the constant noise of expectation and obligation. The differences between Ronan's two lives created a cognitive dissonance that both disturbed and fascinated him. In Manhattan, his morning routine involved a personal trainer, a customized breakfast, prepared by his chef, and a briefing from his assistant about the day's agenda. In Willow Ridge, he woke to silence, made instant coffee in a kitchen with avocado green appliances, and had no agenda beyond avoiding discovery. His penthouse featured floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, art worth more than most people's homes, and technology that anticipated his every need. The farmhouse had windows that stuck when you tried to open them, walls decorated with paint-by-number landscapes, and a thermostat that required actual manual adjustment. The financial contrast was equally jarring. In his real life, he thought nothing of dropping thousands on a dinner, or tens of thousands on a watch. Here, he found himself counting out exact change at the grocery store, marveling at how far $20 could stretch when you weren't buying imported cheese and champagne. But it was the human contrasts that affected him most deeply. In the city, relationships were transactional, every interaction potentially useful or potentially dangerous. People wanted things from him: deals, introductions, investments, approval. In Willow Ridge, the cashier at the grocery store asked about his day and actually waited for an answer. The farmer who lived down the road brought over fresh eggs and refused payment, saying that's what neighbors did. Those first weeks in Willow Ridge unfolded with a deceptive tranquility. Ronan established routines that would have shocked anyone who knew him in his real life. Morning coffee at Mabel's, where he learned to appreciate the simple perfection of eggs over easy and hash browns done just right. Afternoons spent walking the rural roads, his expensive running shoes gathering dust as he chose work boots instead. Evenings on the farmhouse porch, watching sunsets that made him understand why artists had always been drawn to this kind of light. The town began to accept him with the cautious warmth reserved for outsiders who showed proper respect. He learned names, remembered details, and participated in the small talk that greased the wheels of daily interaction. When Tom Bradley's truck broke down, Ronan helped push it to the mechanic. When the library needed volunteers for its book sale, he spent a Saturday sorting donations and carrying boxes. There was a seductive quality to this simplicity, a dangerous comfort in anonymity. For the first time in his adult life, Ronan could move through the world without calculating consequences, without measuring words, without maintaining the careful facade that his position demanded. He could be human in ways that his real life had never allowed. But even in those peaceful early days, there were signs of the storm to come. The way certain conversations stopped when he entered the diner. The questions that probed just a little too deeply about his background. The sense that Willow Ridge, for all its pastoral charm, had its own ways of uncovering truth. And then there was the moment he first saw Coraline Mitchell in the library, her hair catching the afternoon light as she reached for a book on a high shelf, and felt something shift inside him that had nothing to do with his plans for escape and everything to do with the danger of wanting what you couldn't have. The moment when his carefully constructed retreat began its transformation into something far more complicated and far more costly than he could have imagined. The quiet was ending. The storm was beginning. And neither Ronan Sterling nor Coraline Mitchell had any idea how high the price of their connection would ultimately be. Ronan Sterling was born into wealth so vast it distorted reality. While other children's earliest memories involved playgrounds and birthday parties, his revolved around the marble floors of the Sterling mansion and the stern face of his father, Everett Sterling. The Sterling name had adorned buildings and boardrooms for 3 generations, each man more ruthless and successful than the last. Everett had taken his father's considerable fortune and multiplied it tenfold through calculated risks and an almost supernatural ability to predict market trends. What Everett couldn't predict was how to raise a son who would both continue the dynasty and satisfy his impossible standards. From Ronan's earliest years, childhood was treated as preparation for inheritance rather than a time for development and joy. Toys were educational, playdates were networking opportunities with the children of other powerful families, and failure was never an option. "Sterling men don't cry" became the mantra of Ronan's youth, repeated whenever skin knees or hurt feelings threatened to produce tears. "Sterling men don't show weakness" followed close behind, drummed into him. Through countless lectures delivered in his father's wood-paneled study. By age 7, Ronan had learned to swallow emotions rather than express them, to present the face his father demanded rather than reveal his true feelings. His mother, Caroline, provided what warmth she could in the emotional wasteland of their home. a former art historian who had caught Everett's eye at a museum fundraiser. She tried to nurture Ronan's natural curiosity and sensitivity, but her influence waned as Everett's control tightened and her attempts to shield. Her son often resulted in her own painful confrontations with her husband. "He's just a child, Everett," she would plead after particularly harsh criticism had left Ronan struggling to maintain his composure. "He's sterling," would come the inevitable reply, and the sooner he understands what that means, the better. By the time Ronan turned 12, his father's expectations had crystallized into a rigid framework that governed every aspect of his life. His education at Westfield Academy wasn't about learning, but about excelling, about being first in every subject, captain of debate team, president of student council. Friendships were evaluated based on family connections and future utility. Even his hobbies were selected for their ability to develop skills useful in business, chess for strategic thinking, tennis for competitive drive, piano for discipline and precision. The weight of the sterling legacy pressed down on Ronan's shoulders with increasing force as he moved through adolescence. While his classmates worried about prom dates and college applications, he lived with the knowledge that his future had been mapped out before his birth. He would attend his father's alma mater, Harvard. He would earn dual degrees in business and law. He would join Sterling Enterprises and learn every division from the ground up. And eventually, he would take his father's place at the head of the empire. Deviation from this path was not merely discouraged, it was treated as betrayal. When 16-year-old Ronan expressed interest in architecture, fascinated by the way buildings could shape human experience, Everett's response was swift and cutting. "Architects work for men like us, Ronan. They don't become men like us." The message was clear. Passion was a luxury the heir to Sterling Enterprises couldn't afford. Purpose came from power, not personal fulfillment. Success was measured in acquisitions and influence, not happiness or creative expression. This relentless pressure created a profound isolation. Ronan learned early that authentic connection required vulnerability, and vulnerability was forbidden. His peers at school saw only the polished exterior, handsome, brilliant, destined for greatness. They envied his wealth and status without understanding the prison they represented. The few who tried to know the real Ronan quickly discovered the walls he had built were impenetrable. Even romantic relationships followed the Sterling template. Everett expected his son to date daughters from appropriate families, girls who understood the rules of their world and wouldn't demand emotional intimacy that might distract from the business of empire building. Ronan complied, escorting suitable young women to charity galas and society events, maintaining relationships that were as carefully negotiated as business mergers. By 25, Ronan had become exactly what his father had engineered: outwardly perfect, inwardly hollow. He moved through the world with confidence and charm that masked a profound emptiness. The emotional muscles that allow for genuine connection had atrophied from disuse, leaving him capable of transactions but incapable of transformation. At 14, while his classmates spent summer break at camps or on family vacations, Ronan sat in his first board meeting, dressed in a custom-tailored suit that couldn't quite disguise his adolescent frame. He watched his father dominate the room with a mixture of fear and fascination. "My son will be observing today," Everett announced to the assembled executives. Men 3 times Ronan's age who regarded him with curiosity and calculation. Consider it part of his education. For 6 hours, Ronan sat perfectly still, absorbing the language of leveraged buyouts and market penetration, watching his father dismantle opposition with surgical precision. When one board member dared to question Everett's strategy for acquiring a struggling tech company, the response was a masterclass in controlled aggression. "If you lack the vision to see where this leads, Richard, perhaps you should reconsider your position on this board." The words were delivered with a smile that never reached Everett's eyes. Richard didn't speak again. Afterward, in the privacy of the limousine, Everett turned to his son. "What did you learn today?" Ronan considered carefully before answering. "That fear is more effective than respect." Everett's rare smile of approval was both reward and warning. "Fear is reliable. Respect is fickle. Remember that." By 16, Ronan was expected to contribute to these meetings, to offer analysis and insight beyond his years. His father would call on him without warning, testing his preparation and poise under pressure. Ronan, Explain to the board why the Henderson proposal undervalues our contribution. All eyes would turn to him, some hoping for his success, others secretly wishing for his failure. The stakes were always clear: impress his father or face private consequences. So Ronan learned to think 3 steps ahead, to anticipate questions, to project confidence even when uncertainty churned inside him. During one particularly tense negotiation with a family-owned manufacturing company, Ronan watched his father systematically dismantle the life's work of a man who had built something from nothing. The owner, Mr. Grayson, had come alone, without the shield of lawyers and advisors that might have protected him from Everett's tactics. "You've built an admirable business," Everett said, voice smooth as polished marble. "But the market is changing. Without our resources, you'll be obsolete within 5 years." Ronan saw the truth in Mr. Grayson's eyes. He knew Everett was right. Knew his company couldn't survive alone in the evolving landscape. But he also saw something his father missed: the pride and grief of a man being forced to surrender his legacy. That night, Ronan asked his father, was there no way to partner with Grayson rather than absorb him? Everett's response was immediate and cold. "Sentiment is expensive. Ronan Grayson built a company worth having. We're paying fair market value. His feelings are irrelevant to the transaction." By his late 20s, Ronan had achieved everything his father had programmed him to want. His Manhattan penthouse offered panoramic views of the city he helped shape. His closet contained suits that cost more than most people's cars, each one crafted to emphasize his athletic build and commanding presence. His garage housed vehicles chosen not for personal preference but for the message they sent: power, success, untouchability. His calendar was perpetually full. Meetings that determined the fate of companies and the livelihoods of thousands, charity events where donations were carefully calculated for maximum tax benefit and public relations impact, social engagements that served as extensions of the business day. Every hour was accounted for, every interaction had purpose, every decision advanced the sterling agenda. The rare moments alone in his penthouse revealed the hollowness beneath the perfection. Rooms designed by the world's top interior decorator felt like a hotel, beautiful but impersonal. The art on his walls, selected for investment value rather than emotional resonance, failed to move him. Even the view, spectacular by any standard, had become just another asset, something to impress visitors rather than inspire wonder. His 30th birthday celebration exemplified the contradiction of his existence. Held at the Sterling Tower's exclusive rooftop venue, it gathered 300 of New York's elite, politicians, celebrities, business leaders, all eager to curry favor with the Sterling heir. The champagne flowed from bottles worth thousands, the food prepared by a chef flown in from Paris, the entertainment provided by an artist whose private performances typically required a 6-figure fee. Yet as Ronan moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and engaging in the careful dance of social politics, he felt nothing. Not pride in his accomplishments, not pleasure in the celebration, not connection to a single person in the room. He performed happiness with the same skill he demonstrated confidence in the boardroom, but the performance left him exhausted. Later that night, after the last guest had departed, he stood alone on the rooftop, the city lights spread before him like a carpet of stars. In that moment of rare honesty with himself, he acknowledged the truth. He had everything and nothing simultaneously. It started with small rebellions, dismissing his driver to walk through Central Park alone, slipping away from charity galas to find dive bars where the Sterling name meant nothing, trading 5-star restaurants for corner diners where the coffee came in thick, mugs and the waitresses called everyone honey regardless of net worth. These escapes became Ronan's secret addiction. In a life where every moment was scheduled and scrutinized, these stolen hours of anonymity were his only taste of freedom. He developed a mental map of places where he could temporarily shed his identity: a diner in Queens with a jukebox that still played actual records, a neighborhood bar in Brooklyn where the bartender knew him only as Ron, a 24-hour bookstore in the Village where he could lose himself in stories of lives utterly different from his own. In these places, wearing jeans and a plain t-shirt instead of bespoke suits, Ronan discovered versions of himself that couldn't exist in the Sterling world. He could engage in conversations about baseball rather than stock options, could express opinions without calculating their impact, could simply be present without performing excellence. The contrast between these worlds became increasingly stark. In board meetings, he executed his father's vision with precision, his exterior projecting absolute confidence while his interior questioned every value the Sterling Empire represented. In anonymous diners, he found himself lingering over coffee, engaging with strangers, whose lives seemed simultaneously harder and more authentic than his own. A waitress at his favorite Queen's diner once asked him, "What do you do for a living, Ron?" The question, so simple and yet so loaded, left him momentarily speechless. What did he do? He acquired companies. He increased shareholder value. He perpetuated a system that valued profit above all else. "I work in finance," he finally answered, the understatement almost making him laugh. "Sounds boring," she replied with the honesty only strangers can offer. "You don't seem like the type." Her words haunted him for days afterward. What type did he seem like when the sterling facade was removed? Who was he when no one was watching? These questions had no place in the life his father had designed, but they grew louder with each passing year. The true cost of Ronan's inheritance revealed itself in the quiet moments between obligations. In the emptiness of his penthouse, after another successful day of acquisitions and negotiations. In the hollow congratulations from peers who wanted his influence, but not his friendship. In the carefully choreographed relationships with women who saw him as a prize to be won rather than a person to be known. Wealth insulated him from ordinary struggles, but created extraordinary isolation. Every interaction came with questions of motive. Did people want his company or his connections? His attention or his investment? Even genuine interest was suspect in a world where everything had a price and everyone had an agenda. The women in his life followed a predictable pattern. Initial attraction based on his appearance and status. Fascination with the lifestyle he represented. Then, inevitably, frustration with his emotional unavailability. His inability to share himself beyond the carefully constructed exterior. Relationships ended not with dramatic confrontations, but with mutual recognition of incompatibility. With women, walking away from his wealth because it couldn't compensate for his absence, even when physically present. "You're never really here, Ronan," his last girlfriend had said during their final conversation. "You give access to your life but not to yourself." She wasn't wrong. The walls built in childhood had become so much a part of him that he no longer knew how to lower them, or even if anything authentic remained behind them. The skills that made him exceptional in business, detachment, strategic thinking, emotional control, made him incapable of the vulnerability required for genuine connection. His father saw this isolation as strength rather than deprivation. "Attachment is weakness," Everett had told him countless times. "Men like us can't afford to need anyone." But as Ronan approached his mid-30s, the emptiness of this philosophy became increasingly apparent. His father's path had led to professional triumph and personal desolation. 3 failed marriages, estrangement from his only sister, relationships with colleagues based on fear rather than loyalty. Was this the inevitable destination of the Sterling legacy? Was this all there was to inherit? These questions followed Ronan to Willow Ridge, haunting him even as he tried to escape them. The farmhouse's silence amplified his isolation, even as it offered respite from expectation. The simplicity of small-town life highlighted the complexity of his internal conflict, and the possibility of starting over, of being known for himself rather than his name, created both terror and hope in equal measure. For the first time in his life, Ronan Sterling stood at a crossroads not mapped by his father. The path forward was unclear, frightening in its uncertainty but compelling in its possibility. And somewhere in Willow Ridge, in a library filled with stories of transformation and redemption, waited for a woman who would challenge everything he thought he knew about himself and the life he was meant to live. The Willow Ridge Public Library maintained a small collection of antiques in glass cases near the reference section, items donated by longtime residents to preserve the town's history. Among these treasures was a 1942 Underwood typewriter, once used by the local newspaper editor to document everything from war bulletins to county fair results. Coraline had always been drawn to it, often pausing to admire its elegant mechanics and imagine the stories it had helped tell. On a quiet Tuesday afternoon, as rain tapped gently against the library windows, she decided to clean the display cases. The library was nearly empty, Just Mrs. Garrett browsing the mystery section and a few high school students using the computers. And him, the stranger who had been coming in regularly for the past 2 weeks, always selecting books with careful consideration before settling into the armchair by the east window. Coraline had noticed him, of course. In a town where she knew every face, a new one stood out like a lighthouse beam. Especially when that face belonged to a man who moved with such quiet confidence, who read with such intense focus, who seemed both present in the room and somehow separate from it. She was carefully removing the typewriter from its case when the ribbon mechanism suddenly unspooled, sending a black silk ribbon cascading to the floor in elegant loops. As she knelt to gather it, she realized the ribbon had continued its journey all the way to the stranger's feet. "I think your typewriter is trying to get my attention," he said, his voice carrying a hint of amusement as he set aside his book and bent to help her. "It's not usually so forward," Coraline replied, surprising herself with the ease of her response. "I should apologize for its behavior." Their eyes met as they both reached for the same section of ribbon, his fingers brushing against hers briefly. Up close, she noticed details she hadn't observed from behind the circulation desk, the precise gray of his eyes, the slight crease between his brows that suggested habitual concentration, the way his smile seemed to start reluctantly before fully committing. "I'm Ronan," he said, carefully winding the ribbon he'd collected. "Coraline Mitchell, town librarian and apparently terrible typewriter wrangler." They worked together to gather the ribbon, their conversation flowing with unexpected ease. He asked about the typewriter's history, listening with genuine interest as she shared what she knew about its previous owner. She found herself elaborating, adding details about the newspaper editor's reputation for integrity and his famous editorials against corruption in the county government. "You know a lot about local history," he observed, as they finished rewinding the ribbon. "Occupational hazard," she replied. "When you're surrounded by books and town records all day, you absorb stories whether you mean to or not." "And do you mean to, I mean?" The question caught her off guard with its perception. "Yes," she admitted. "I collect stories the way some people collect stamps or coins. They're more valuable to me than anything else." As she returned the typewriter to its case, she felt his eyes on her, assessing in a way that made her both uncomfortable and intrigued. There was something different about the way he looked at her, not with the familiarity of someone who had known her all her life, nor with the dismissive glance of tourists passing through. He looked at her as if she were a puzzle worth solving. "What brings you to Willow Ridge?" she asked, closing the display case. "We don't get many visitors who spend their afternoons reading obscure poetry in small-town libraries." A shadow crossed his face, so quickly she almost missed it. "I'm writing," he said, after a brief hesitation. "Or trying to. I needed somewhere quiet, somewhere different." "Different from what?" His smile returned, but with a guarded quality. "From everywhere else." Their connection grew in small moments, each one building upon the last like chapters in a carefully crafted novel. After the typewriter incident, Ronan began timing his library visits to coincide with Coraline's shifts. Their conversations expanded from books to music, from local history to global politics, each exchange revealing new layers of compatibility that neither had expected. The first time he invited her to the farmhouse, it was under the pretense of borrowing a book from her personal collection, a novel out of print that the library didn't carry. She arrived with the book and a homemade pie, a peace offering to his solitude that he accepted with visible surprise. They sat on his porch that evening, as the sun set over the cornfields, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink that city smog had never allowed him to see. The conversation flowed without effort, punctuated by comfortable silences that neither felt compelled to fill. When she finally left, the night air had grown cool, and something warm had taken root between them. Porch nights became their ritual. Sometimes they talked until midnight, sharing stories and perspectives. Other times, they simply existed in parallel, she writing in her notebook, he reading. Beside her, the crickets providing a soundtrack to their companionable silence. These evenings revealed Ronan in glimpses, his unexpected knowledge of constellations, his dry humor that emerged when he felt comfortable, his thoughtful questions that showed he truly listened when she spoke. Laughter came easier with each meeting. She discovered his weakness for terrible puns, delighting in the way his serious demeanor would crack when she delivered one with deliberate timing, he found himself charmed by her animated storytelling, the way her hands moved, and her eyes brightened when describing the characters who populated her imagination. "You should hear yourself," he told her one evening as they shared a bottle of wine on the porch swing. "When you talk about your stories, you come alive in a different way." "Is that a compliment or an insult to my usual state of being?" she teased. "Definitely a compliment," he replied, his voice softening. "It's like watching someone speak their native language after struggling with translations." Their worlds expanded through these exchanges. She introduced him to Willow Ridge's hidden treasures, the abandoned quarry, where teenagers had carved their initials for generations, the field where wildflowers grew in patterns that seemed almost deliberate, the oak tree, behind the elementary school that housed the town's oldest tire swing. He shared perspectives from his travels, carefully edited to remove references to luxury, hotels and business meetings, focusing instead on the human elements that had touched him. One night, lying on a blanket in his backyard, they watched meteors streak across the sky during the Perseid shower. The darkness made confession easier, allowing words to emerge that daylight might have kept contained. "Do you ever feel like you're living the wrong life?" he asked, his voice barely audible above the night sounds. "Like somewhere there's a version of you that took a different path, and sometimes you can almost feel that life is running parallel to this one?" She turned to look at his profile, sharp against the star-filled sky. "All the time," she admitted. "That's why I write, I think, to explore those other paths without having to actually take them. And is that enough? Exploration without experience?" The question hung between them, weighted with implications neither was ready to address. "I don't know," she finally answered. "Is anything ever enough?" As summer gave way to early autumn, their connection deepened beyond the casual friendship that had first developed. The emotional walls Ronan had built over decades began to show hairline fractures, not enough to collapse, but enough to allow glimpses of his true self to emerge. One evening, as rain drummed against the farmhouse roof, he confessed fears he had never voiced to anyone. "Sometimes I think I've spent so long being what other people expected that I've lost the ability to be anything else," he said, staring into his coffee as if it might contain answers. "Like I'm hollow inside, just a collection of performances with nothing authentic at the core." Coraline, sitting cross-legged on the couch beside him, considered his words carefully. "I don't think that's true," she finally said. "The person you are when you're here, when it's just us talking, that person feels real to me." "Maybe that's the problem," he replied, meeting her eyes with rare vulnerability. "Maybe I'm only real when I'm pretending to be someone else." The irony of his statement hung between them, though she couldn't fully understand its significance. She only knew that something in his confession resonated with her own fears, that her life in Willow Ridge was too small, that her dreams were too big, that the gap between them might never be bridged. "I have a theory," she said, pulling her notebook from her bag, "about people like us. Are there people like us? More than you'd think." She flipped through pages filled with her neat handwriting until she found what she was looking for. "I think some people are born with internal compasses that don't point north like everyone else's. We're oriented towards something different, something most people can't see or understand. It makes us feel lost sometimes, out of step. But maybe we're not lost at all. Maybe we're just following a different map." He took the notebook when she offered it, reading the passage she had written months before meeting him. His expression shifted as he absorbed her words, something like recognition dawning in his eyes. "You've thought about this a lot," he said, returning the notebook. "Writing helps me make sense of things, turns chaos into narrative, gives meaning to what feels random. And does it work? Does the narrative make the chaos easier to bear?" "Sometimes," she admitted. "Other times, it just makes me more aware of the gap between the story I'm writing and the one I'm living." In these moments of shared vulnerability, something shifted between them. Friendship deepening into understanding evolving into something neither was prepared to name. They began to serve as mirrors for each other, reflecting back versions of themselves they had never fully seen before. Coraline's storytelling became a source of unexpected hope for Ronan. She shared fragments of her works in progress, character sketches and plot ideas that revealed her belief in redemption and second chances. Through her stories, she created worlds where people could reinvent themselves, where past mistakes didn't determine future possibilities, where authenticity ultimately triumphed over pretense. Your characters always find their way home, he observed one night after she had read him a new chapter. Even when home isn't a place but a truth about themselves. I believe that's possible, she said simply. Don't you? The question challenged him more than she knew. Home had always been a concept, rather than a reality for Ronan. The Sterling mansion was a showcase, his Manhattan penthouse a statement. Neither had ever provided the sense of belonging that Coraline seemed to take for granted, despite her restlessness in Willow Ridge. I want to, he finally answered, the most honest response he could offer. What would you do if you fell in love with someone hiding a powerful identity? Would you feel betrayed upon discovering the truth, or would you understand the need for secrecy? Could you forgive someone who entered your life under false pretenses, even if their feelings for you were genuine? As Ronan and Coraline's connection deepens, these questions become increasingly urgent. Their story reminds us that authenticity comes with risks, that vulnerability requires courage, and that sometimes the greatest act of love is simply being honest about who we really are. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever discovered someone wasn't who they claimed to be? How did you handle it? Your experiences might help others navigate similar situations in their own lives. Don't forget to subscribe to Rich Billionaires Romance Stories for more tales of love that transcend wealth and status. Next week, we'll see how Ronan's carefully constructed new identity begins to crack under the weight of his growing feelings for Coraline and the unexpected threat that emerges from his past. September brought the annual Willow Ridge Harvest Festival, transforming the town square into a celebration of rural traditions that had endured for generations. Strings of lights crisscrossed overhead, casting a golden glow on vendors, selling everything from apple butter to hand-carved wooden toys. The air carried the mingled scents of kettle corn, cinnamon, and the first hint of autumn chill. Coraline found Ronan by the pie-judging tent, watching with amusement as Mrs. Henderson and Mrs. Patterson engaged in their yearly passive-aggressive competition for blue ribbon glory. You came, she said, unable to hide her surprise. In their conversations, he had always seemed uncomfortable with the idea of community gatherings, preferring their private world of porch conversations and shared books. I wanted to see it through your eyes, he replied, offering her a paper cup of hot cider. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, a small contact that sent warmth through her that had nothing to do with the steaming drink. They wandered through the festival together, her knowledge of local customs turning what might have been ordinary into something special. She introduced him to people not as her friend or date, but simply as Ronan, allowing him to exist in this space without definition or expectation. He seemed to relax as the evening progressed, his smile coming more easily, his laughter less guarded. At the dance floor set up near the bandstand, elderly couples waltzed alongside teenagers attempting more contemporary moves. When the band shifted to a slow melody, Ronan hesitated only briefly before extending his hand. I'm not much of a dancer, Coraline warned as she accepted his invitation. Neither am I, he admitted. At least, not this kind of dancing. She wanted to ask what kind he did know, but the question dissolved as he drew her into his arms. They moved together with surprising ease, finding rhythm in the space between practice steps and natural instinct. His hand at the small of her back felt both protective and respectful, maintaining the perfect distance, close enough for intimacy, far enough for propriety. Everyone's watching us, she murmured, feeling the weight of curious gazes. Let them, he replied, his voice low near her ear. I'm only seeing you. The moment crystallized something that had been forming between them for weeks, an acknowledgement that their connection had evolved beyond friendship into something neither had anticipated. When the song ended, they remained briefly in each other's arms, reluctant to break the spell that had enveloped them. Their relationship deepened through shared experiences that revealed new dimensions of each other. Late-night drives down country roads in his rented truck, windows down to let. In the cool autumn air, radio playing songs they both knew the words to. Afternoons spent at the lake, skipping stones and building elaborate stories about the people who lived in the houses visible on the distant shore. Mornings at Mabel's Diner, where they claimed the corner booth and lingered over coffee long after their plates were empty. In these moments, Ronan showed her a tenderness that seemed to surprise even him. The way he tucked her hair behind her ear when the wind blew it across her face. How he remembered her coffee preference, one sugar splash of cream without being reminded. the careful attention he paid when she spoke about her writing, asking questions. That showed he truly wanted to understand the worlds she created. For Coraline, who had dated men who viewed her small-town life as something to rescue her from, Ronan's appreciation for the simplicity of Willow Ridge was refreshing. He noticed details others overlooked: the changing colors of the maple trees lining Main Street, the craftsmanship of the courthouse clock tower, the way morning fog transformed ordinary fields into mysterious landscapes. "You see beauty in things most people ignore," she told him one evening, as they sat on the hood of his truck, watching the sunset paint the sky in dramatic strokes of orange and purple. "I've spent too much time surrounded by things that are beautiful but empty," he replied, his eyes on the horizon. "This is different. This is real." Despite their growing closeness, certain subjects remained carefully avoided, creating shadows in the landscape of their relationship. Whenever conversation drifted toward his professional background, Ronan redirected with practiced ease, offering vague references to finance and consulting without specific details. At the diner one morning, the television mounted above the counter broadcast a business news segment featuring Sterling Enterprises' latest acquisition. Coraline noticed how Ronan's body tensed, his attention suddenly fixed on his coffee cup as the anchor discussed Everett Sterling's aggressive expansion strategy. "Something wrong?" she asked, following his gaze to the screen. "No," he replied too quickly. "Just reminded of work. Not why I came to Willow Ridge." She accepted his explanation, though something in his reaction, the sudden distance in his eyes, the tightness around his mouth, registered as important, a piece of a puzzle she couldn't yet assemble. His last name became another curious point of sensitivity. He had introduced himself simply as Ronan during their first meeting, and she had naturally begun using his full name, Ronan Sterling, after seeing it on his library card application. Yet she couldn't help noticing how he seemed to flinch slightly whenever she said it, as though the sound of his own name caused him physical discomfort. During the town council meeting they attended together, her idea to show him how local government functioned, Mayor Wilson had approached them afterward. "Mr. Sterling, isn't it? Any relation to the Sterling family of New York, the business moguls?" Ronan's smile remained in place, but Coraline felt him withdraw emotionally, pulling back behind walls she had thought dismantled. "Common name," he replied smoothly. "No relation." Later, when she mentioned the exchange, his response was dismissive. "People always look for connections. It doesn't mean anything." But it did mean something. She could feel it in the sudden coolness between them, in the way he changed the subject with uncharacteristic abruptness. It was the first time since their friendship began that she felt him deliberately keeping her at a distance, and the experience left her unsettled. As September gave way to October, small inconsistencies in Ronan's carefully constructed narrative began to accumulate in Coraline's mind. The writer in her couldn't help noticing when details didn't align, when stories contradicted each other in subtle ways that most people would overlook. He claimed to have attended state universities, yet occasionally referenced professors whose names she recognized from elite Ivy League institutions. His knowledge of wine was extensive for someone who described his background as middle class, his table manners too perfect for someone who claimed to have worked his way through college waiting tables. Most telling were the phone calls. Though infrequent, they transformed him instantly, his posture straightening, his voice taking on a clipped, authoritative tone she had never heard him use with anyone in Willow Ridge. He always stepped outside or moved to another room for these conversations, returning with a distracted expression that took minutes to dissolve. One evening, as they prepared dinner together in the farmhouse kitchen, his phone rang with a call he couldn't avoid taking in her presence. She pretended to focus on chopping vegetables while listening to his side of the conversation. "The projection is unacceptable. No, I won't authorize it remotely. That's not how we operate, and you know it." His voice had transformed completely, carrying an authority that commanded rather than requested. "Tell Davidson I'll review his proposal when I return, not before." When he ended the call, he stood motionless for a moment, as if recalibrating, before turning back to her with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Sorry about that. Just some loose ends I need to tie up." "Must be important loose ends," she observed carefully. "You sounded different." "Did I?" He resumed slicing bread, his movements precise. "Just work mode, I guess. Everyone has one." But Coraline had never heard that particular mode from anyone in Willow Ridge. It carried the unmistakable weight of significant power, of decisions, that affected more than just a small business or local concern. It was the voice of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. These inconsistencies created a growing curiosity that she tried to suppress, respecting his apparent need for privacy, while wondering what truths lay beneath the careful omissions. The writer in her constructed theories. Perhaps he was recovering from professional burnout. Maybe he was researching a book of his own. Possibly he was simply a private person who preferred to live in the present rather than discuss his past. Yet none of these explanations fully satisfied the questions that accumulated with each new contradiction. Who was Ronan Sterling when he wasn't in Willow Ridge? And why did he seem so determined to keep that person separate from the man she was growing to love? 600 miles away from the quiet rhythms of Willow Ridge, Everett Sterling stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Manhattan office, surveying the city that had both shaped and submitted to his ambition. At 68, he remained an imposing figure, tall, broad-shouldered, with silver hair that complemented rather than diminished his aura of authority. His tailored suit, handcrafted Italian shoes, and the vintage Patek Philippe watch on his wrist were not mere status symbols but armor, the uniform of power he had worn for 4 decades. The corner office on the 60th floor of Sterling Tower offered views of Central Park to the north and the Hudson River to the west, a daily reminder of his position above the ordinary concerns of the city below. The space was designed to intimidate, minimal furnishings of exceptional quality, abstract art selected for investment value rather than aesthetic appeal, and a desk large enough to create significant distance between himself and anyone seated across from him. "Mr. Sterling, your son's assistant is here," his secretary announced through the intercom. "Send her in." Jessica Chen entered with the careful composure of someone who had learned to navigate Everett Sterling's unpredictable moods. At 32, she had served as Ronan's executive assistant for 5 years, earning a reputation for efficiency and discretion that made her invaluable to the Sterling operation. "Mr. Sterling," she began, "I've prepared the report you requested on the projects Ronan was overseeing before his departure." Everett's expression hardened at the delicate phrasing. "You mean before his disappearance?" "Let's not pretend this is a sanctioned absence, Ms. Chen." "Yes, sir." She placed a leather portfolio on his desk. "Everything is proceeding according to schedule, with the exception of the Davidson acquisition. The team is hesitant to move forward without Ronan's final approval." "And you've had no direct contact with my son?" "No, sir. Only the brief calls regarding urgent decisions as you instructed. He's been minimal in his responses." Everett turned back to the window, his reflection revealing nothing of his thoughts. 6 weeks, he said, more to himself than to Jessica. 6 weeks of this childish game. "The board is beginning to ask questions," she ventured. "The official story about him conducting site visits for potential acquisitions won't hold much longer." "The board will accept whatever explanation I give them," Everett replied, his tone making it clear the subject was closed. "What about the tracking?" Jessica hesitated before answering. "The GPS on his phone shows he's remained in the same general area since he left, a small town in the Midwest called Willow Ridge. And what exactly is in Willow Ridge that would keep my son from his responsibilities for 6 weeks? We don't know, sir. The investigator you hired has been discreet, but his preliminary report indicates Ronan has been socializing with locals, particularly a woman who works at the town library." Something dangerous flashed in Everett's eyes. "A woman," he repeated, the words carrying a weight of past disappointments. "Always a woman." Jessica remained silent, knowing better than to comment on the complex relationship between father and son. She had witnessed enough tense exchanges, enough cold fury from Everett and rigid resistance from Ronan to understand the fault lines that ran through the Sterling dynasty. "Prepare the jet," Everett said, after a long silence. "Not for me. For Gregory Phillips." Jessica couldn't hide her surprise. Phillips was Sterling Enterprises' most ruthless problem solver, a man whose methods were effective but rarely gentle. "Sir, do you think that's necessary? Ronan has still been handling the most critical decisions remotely." "What's necessary, Ms. Chen, is reminding my son of his obligations." Everett turned from the window, his expression resolute. "Sterling Enterprises doesn't run itself. The Davidson deal represents a billion-dollar opportunity that won't wait for Ronan's personal exploration. The contempt in his voice made the last two words sound like a character flaw rather than a human need. Jessica had always found it disturbing how Everett spoke about his son, not with the pride or affection one might expect, but with the critical assessment of an investment that must perform to expectations. "Phillips will leave tomorrow," Everett continued. "He'll assess the situation and deliver a message. Ronan has 48 hours to return to New York and resume his duties, or I'll be forced to take more direct action." "And if he refuses?" Everett's smile contained no warmth. "My son may have temporarily forgotten who he is and what he owes to the Sterling name. Phillips will help him remember." Back in Willow Ridge, the pace of Ronan and Coraline's relationship accelerated even as unseen threats gathered momentum. October brought earlier sunsets and cooler evenings, driving them from porch conversations to nights by the farmhouse fireplace, physical proximity increasing as the temperature dropped. Their first kiss happened on a Wednesday evening, unexpected yet inevitable. They had been discussing a book they both loved, disagreeing about the protagonist's motivations, with the comfortable intensity of people who enjoy the debate as much as the potential resolution. "You're missing the point entirely," Coraline insisted, leaning forward in her chair. "He doesn't leave because he's afraid of commitment. He leaves because he's afraid his love will destroy her." "That's a convenient excuse," Ronan countered. "Fear disguised as nobility is still just fear," says the man who... She stopped abruptly, realizing she was about to cross into territory they had silently agreed to avoid. His own reluctance to discuss his past, his careful maintenance of emotional boundaries despite their growing closeness. The sudden silence hung between them, acknowledging the parallel neither had intended to draw. Ronan set down his wineglass and moved to kneel beside her chair, his expression serious. "The man who what?" he asked quietly. "Nothing," she replied, embarrassed by her near accusation. "I didn't mean—" "You did," he interrupted gently. "And you're not wrong." Before she could respond, he leaned forward and kissed her, a gesture that felt simultaneously like a confession and a diversion. His lips were soft against hers, the contact brief but charged with weeks of building attraction and unspoken questions. When he pulled back, the look in his eyes contained both vulnerability and determination. "I'm not good at this," he admitted, "at letting people see me. But I'm trying." The kiss changed everything and nothing. Their relationship evolved with increasing momentum, shared meals becoming more intimate, conversations delving deeper, physical affection growing more natural with each encounter. Yet the shadows remained, the questions unasked, the truths unshared. As Halloween approached, bringing with it Willow Ridge's traditional celebrations, the tension between what was developing between them and what remained hidden created an undercurrent of urgency. Ronan began checking his phone more frequently, his expression darkening at messages he refused to discuss. Coraline found herself watching him when he wasn't aware, cataloging the moments when his carefully constructed persona slipped to reveal glimpses of someone else, someone with burdens he wouldn't name and responsibilities he wouldn't acknowledge. The town's Halloween festival brought these tensions to a breaking point. As they walked among the decorated storefronts of Main Street, children in costumes rushing past with candy bags and excited shrieks, Ronan's phone rang with a call he couldn't ignore. "I need to take this," he said, stepping away from the crowd. "I'll just be a minute." Coraline waited, watching as his expression transformed through the now familiar progression. Professional, mask sliding into place, shoulders squaring, free hand gesturing with authority as he spoke. The conversation appeared heated, his responses becoming increasingly terse until he finally ended the call with visible frustration. When he returned to her side, the distance in his eyes told her something had changed. "I'm sorry," he said, taking her hand. "Work issues that won't wait. Anything you want to talk about?" She offered, knowing the answer before he gave it. "Nothing worth ruining our evening over." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Let's enjoy the festival." But the carefree mood had evaporated, replaced by a sense that time was running out, that the bubble they had created around themselves in Willow Ridge was growing thinner by the moment. As they watched the costume, the discovery happened by accident. Coraline was researching Willow Ridge's founding families for the library's historical exhibit when she found it. A folder misfiled among century-old land deeds. Inside, recent contracts for massive land purchases surrounding the town, all bearing the Sterling Enterprises letterhead. The same sterling name she had seen on business news segments. The same sterling name as Ronan's. Midnight in the library basement. Coraline hunched over the ancient oak table, surrounded by stacks of yellowed papers. Her single desk lamp created a small island of light in the darkness. She pulled document after document, connecting pieces of a puzzle she never wanted to solve. Paper dust floated in the lamplight like ghosts, witnesses to secrets being unearthed after careful burial. Then she saw it, Ronan's signature, precise and authoritative, on a memo outlining plans to acquire Willow Ridge properties through shell companies. The strategy was methodical. Buy key parcels, pressure remaining holdouts, transform the town into a luxury resort development. The date, 3 months before he arrived. His presence in Willow Ridge wasn't a coincidence. It was reconnaissance. Coraline sat motionless, documents spread before her, like evidence at a crime scene. The man who held her hand beneath starlit skies was the same man who had signed these papers. The man whose laughter had become essential to her days, had planned her town's destruction before ever meeting her. Loyalty to him warred with loyalty to her community. Dawn found her still at the table, a decision made. She gathered the documents into her bag with trembling hands. The weight of them felt physical, pressing against her chest as she locked the archive door. By nightfall she would confront Ronan with the truth. By nightfall she would discover if anything between them had ever been real. The farmhouse porch light cast long shadows across the yard as Coraline parked her car. Dried leaves skittered across the gravel, driven by a wind that carried winter's first warning. Inside her bag, the documents felt impossibly heavy. Ronan opened the door before she knocked, his smile fading as he registered her expression. "What's wrong?" he asked, stepping aside to let her in. The farmhouse kitchen, usually a space of warmth and easy conversation, felt charged with tension. Coraline placed her bag on the table, hands trembling slightly as she withdrew the folder. "I found these today," she said quietly, spreading the documents between them like cards in a game neither could win. In the town archives, Ronan's face drained of color as he recognized the Sterling Enterprises. Letterhead, his own signature at the bottom of damning pages. His eyes met hers, no longer hiding behind careful masks. "Tell me it's not what it looks like," Coraline said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ronan's shoulders sagged as he sank into a chair. "What does it look like to you?" "Like you came to Willow Ridge to help your company buy it. Like everything," her voice caught, "everything between us has been researched." "Not everything," he said immediately. "Not us." "Then explain, please." Ronan ran a hand through his hair, resignation settling over him. "My name is Ronan Sterling, not just Sterling, the Sterling. My father is Everett Sterling. Sterling Enterprises is my inheritance, my prison. And yes, initially, the reason I came here. Initially, I was supposed to assess the town's vulnerabilities, identify key properties, and prepare for a hostile takeover if necessary. Standard procedure for resort development. And now nothing makes sense anymore. Especially not that plan." Coraline didn't storm out as he might have expected. Instead, she sat across from him, eyes never leaving his face. "I need the whole truth, Ronan, not pieces, not the version you think I want to hear." The tenderness in her request broke something in him. Not anger, not accusation, just a simple plea for honesty, after months of careful lies. "I've spent my entire life being Everett Sterling's son," he began, voice low. "Every decision made for me, every path predetermined. I came to Willow Ridge to do a job, to be the perfect Sterling heir. But then what?" she prompted when he fell silent. "Then I met you. And for the first time, I wanted something that had nothing to do with Sterling Enterprises. I wanted mornings at Mabel's and evenings on this porch. I wanted you." "What happens to Willow Ridge in this story?" Coraline asked, fingers tracing the outline of the development plans. "What happens to people's homes, their businesses? Originally, they would be bought out or forced out. The town would become Sterling Shores Resort. And now?" Ronan met her gaze directly. "Now I'm trapped between worlds. My father expects this development. The board is waiting for my assessment. Billions in potential profit depend on my recommendation. And us? Where do we fit?" That's the impossible question. If I defy my father, I lose everything. My position, my inheritance, my identity. If I do what's expected, I lose you, and whatever chance I have at a life that actually means something. So what will you choose? The empire or the truth? The sterling legacy or, she hesitated, or me? We've reached a crucial turning point in Ronan and Coraline's story. That moment when truth collides with comfort, when the foundations of a relationship are tested by revelation. It's a moment many of us have faced in our own lives, the discovery that someone we care for deeply isn't exactly who we thought they were. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever had to choose between comfortable illusions and difficult truths, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue bringing these complex emotional stories to life. Share this with someone who understands that real love isn't about perfection. It's about honesty, even when that honesty hurts. Because what happens next between Ronan and Coraline will challenge everything they thought they knew about love, loyalty, and the courage required for both. Phonin. The morning after his confession to Coraline, Ronan stood at the farmhouse window watching dawn break over fields soon to be covered in frost. His phone buzzed incessantly, calls from his father, from the board, from lawyers, suddenly scrambling to contain a situation spinning beyond control. Someone had leaked the sterling development plans to the press. Not just the Willow Ridge project, but dozens of similar schemes across the country, communities targeted, livelihoods calculated as acceptable collateral damage for profit. Coraline sat in her apartment above the pharmacy, surrounded by newspaper clippings and printouts of online articles. She hadn't leaked the documents. That decision had been taken from her by forces she couldn't identify. Now she watched as Ronan's two worlds collided catastrophically, feeling both vindicated and heartbroken. In our society, across America, the sterling scandal dominated every news cycle. Financial analysts dissected the company's ethical failures on morning shows. Social media exploded with hashtags, #SterlingScandal, and #SaveSmallTowns. The story resonated because it crystallized growing resentment toward corporate power, the faceless entities that valued spreadsheets over communities. Headlines screamed across digital and print media. Sterling Enterprises exposed. Billionaire families plot to destroy American small towns. Heir apparent Ronan Sterling goes rogue. Love affair leads to corporate meltdown. Sterling stocks in freefall as investors flee toxic brand. On Wall Street, panic spread through trading floors. Sterling Enterprises shares dropped 40% in a single day, triggering circuit breakers and temporary trading halts. Institutional investors issued statements distancing themselves from the company. Partners and subsidiaries scrambled to rebrand, to sever connections with the suddenly radioactive Sterling name. Former employees emerged with their own stories. A former executive assistant detailed Everett Sterling's ruthless tactics. Engineers described being ordered to falsify environmental impact reports. Community liaisons confessed to spreading misinformation to local governments. Each new revelation fueled the fire, transforming a business scandal into a cultural moment, a public reckoning with the human cost of unchecked corporate power. The Sterling name, once synonymous with success, became overnight shorthand for corporate villainy. For Ronan, the public crucifixion came with brutal efficiency. His face appeared on magazine covers with headlines like The Two Faces of Ronan Sterling and Billionaire Betrayer. Paparazzi descended on Willow Ridge, camping outside the farmhouse, ambushing locals for quotes about the real Ronan. His entire life became public property, college photos, past relationships, professional decisions, all dissected for evidence of character flaws. The narrative split between portraying him as villain or victim. Some painted him as his father's willing accomplice, only turning against Sterling Enterprises when emotionally compromised. Others cast him as the reluctant heir finally finding moral courage. Neither version captured the complex truth, the years of internal conflict that had led to this breaking point. Worst were the attacks on his relationship with Coraline, reduced to either calculated manipulation or naive rebellion against his father. Their private connection, the one genuine thing in his carefully constructed life, became fodder for public consumption and casual judgment. In the eye of the media storm, Ronan experienced contradictory emotions that left him reeling. Betrayal cut deep, Someone had accessed confidential documents and exposed not just the company, but him personally. His privacy, his relationship with Coraline, his attempt to forge an authentic identity, all violated and displayed for public entertainment. Yet beneath the betrayal ran an unexpected current of liberation. The secrets were out. The carefully maintained facade had crumbled. For the first time since childhood, he didn't have to pretend, to calculate, to perform the role of sterling heir. The worst had happened, and he was still standing. "They can't take anything else from me," he told Coraline during a rare moment of privacy. "It's all gone. The position, the power, the expectations. And how does that feel?" she asked, searching his face. "Terrifying," he admitted. And somehow, like breathing for the first time, the sterling empire, built over 3 generations, unraveled with stunning speed. Government investigations into business practices were announced. Class action lawsuits from communities previously targeted for development flooded the legal system. The board of directors, sensing the changing winds, voted to place Everett on administrative leave pending internal investigation. Sterling Tower, once the physical manifestation of the family's power, became a symbol of their fall. Employees cleared their desks, uncertain if their jobs would exist the following week. Partners canceled contracts, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. The Sterling name was removed from charitable foundations, university buildings, and hospital wings as institutions rushed to distance themselves. Everett's fury manifested in a scorched earth campaign against his son. He gave an exclusive interview calling Ronan emotionally unstable and manipulated by small-town provincialism. He froze personal accounts, revoked access to family properties, and publicly disowned the son he had once groomed as his successor. The message was clear: Ronan had chosen Willow Ridge over the Sterling legacy, and his father would ensure he paid the full price for that choice. Winter descended on Willow Ridge, blanketing the farmhouse in snow that muffled the world outside. 2 weeks after the scandal broke, Ronan and Coraline sat before the fireplace, the dancing flames the only light in the room. The media circus had finally begun to dissipate, leaving them in an uneasy calm. "You destroyed everything," Ronan said quietly, staring into the fire. Not an accusation, a statement of fact, delivered with the hollow tone of a man surveying the ruins of his former life. "I didn't leak those documents," Coraline replied, her voice steady despite the hurt his words caused. "I know, but you found them. You confronted me. You started this." "No." She turned to face him fully. "Your father started this when he taught you that your value was tied to his empire. I didn't destroy everything, Ronan. I destroyed the prison." "There's a difference." He looked at her then, really looked, as if seeing a truth that had been there all along. The path to reconciliation wasn't smooth. Some days Ronan woke with panic clawing at his throat, the lifelong programming of Sterling expectations still running in his subconscious. On those mornings, he would find reasons to avoid Coraline, to retreat into the familiar comfort of resentment. "I don't know who I am without it all," he confessed during one such moment, standing at the kitchen window watching snow fall. "Without the name, the position, the purpose." "That's the point," she said, keeping her distance but not her silence. "You get to find out. And if there's nothing to find, if I'm just an empty shell, will my father be filled with his ambitions? Then you'll build something new." But I don't believe that's true. The tension between them reflected his internal struggle, anger at having choices, forced upon him warring with gratitude for the freedom to make new ones. Healing came in small moments. Ronan fixed the farmhouse's leaking roof himself instead of hiring someone. Satisfaction in his sore muscles and the tangible results of his labor. Coraline taught him to bake bread, his hands covered in flour as they laughed at his first misshapen loaf. Evenings reading by the fire, the simple pleasure of stories shared without agenda or expectation. Gradually, he ventured back into town, not as the mysterious stranger or the disgraced billionaire, but as someone seeking connection. He volunteered at the library, shelving books and helping with the children's reading program. When the community center's heating system failed during the coldest week of January, he quietly paid for repairs without announcement or recognition. "Why did you do that?" Coraline asked when she discovered his anonymous donation. "Because I could," he replied simply. "Because it mattered to people who mattered to me." The words represented a fundamental shift. from value measured in acquisitions to value measured in contributions. Ronan and Coraline's journey forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about our own lives. What parts of ourselves do we sacrifice for success? What prisons have we built, mistaking them for achievements? Would you risk losing everything you've built for truth and real love? It's easy to judge Ronan's initial deception from a distance, harder to examine the masks we wear in our own relationships. How many of us present carefully edited versions of ourselves, fearing that authentic vulnerability might cost us connection rather than deepen it? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever faced a moment when honesty meant potentially losing something valuable? Did you choose truth or security? What happened as a result? Your stories matter. They remind us that these fictional characters reflect real human struggles with identity, authenticity, and the courage required to choose a different path when the one we've been following no longer serves our true selves. Spring arrived in Willow Ridge, bringing renewal to more than just the landscape. As crocuses pushed through thawing soil and buds appeared on dormant branches, Ronan and Coraline's relationship blossomed into something neither had experienced before, a connection founded on complete honesty. After the storm of revelation had cleared away all pretense, the contrast couldn't have been more stark. Sterling Enterprises continued its public implosion, each new investigation revealing deeper layers of deception. The empire Everett had built over decades crumbled not because of Ronan's departure or the scandal's exposure, but because its foundation had always been compromised, power maintained through manipulation, success achieved through exploitation. Meanwhile, in a farmhouse that had become a true home, Ronan and Coraline built something different. Their relationship, tested by fire and forged in truth, grew stronger with each passing day. The painful honesty that had nearly destroyed them became their greatest strength, creating trust where suspicion might have flourished. Ronan's transformation manifested in ways both subtle and profound. He sold his remaining sterling assets, using the proceeds to establish a foundation dedicated to protecting small towns from predatory development. The irony wasn't lost on him, using wealth accumulated through his father's tactics to defend against those very strategies. His voice, once reserved for boardroom commands, now advocated for community preservation at town halls and state legislative sessions. The skills honed in corporate battles served new purposes, negotiating with developers to ensure local interests were protected, helping small business owners understand contracts designed to exploit them. Most significant was his internal shift. The constant performance of perfection gave way to comfortable authenticity. He learned to value effort over outcome, intention over impression. The man who once calculated every interaction for strategic advantage now engaged with genuine curiosity and compassion. "You've changed," Coraline observed one evening as they walked along the creek behind the farmhouse. "I've become myself," he corrected gently. "There's a difference." While Ronan reinvented his relationship with power and influence, Coraline pursued her own transformation. The writer who had filled notebooks with fictional worlds found her voice in reality, documenting the stories of communities like Willow Ridge across America. Her first published piece appeared in a regional magazine, an essay about small-town resilience in the face of economic pressure. This led to a series examining the human impact of corporate development, putting faces and voices to statistics typically buried in environmental impact reports. These weren't blockbuster book deals or national magazine features, but they represented something more valuable to Coraline: purpose aligned with passion. Each published piece validated her belief that ordinary lives contained extraordinary meaning, that places like Willow Ridge weren't just dots on a map, but complex ecosystems of human connection worth preserving. "Your stories are changing minds," Ronan told her after her work was cited in a state policy debate. "One reader at a time," she agreed, understanding that meaningful change rarely came through dramatic gestures but through persistent, thoughtful engagement. Their life together defied conventional measures of success. The farmhouse remained modestly furnished, more comfortable than luxurious. They drove practical vehicles rather than status symbols. Vacations meant exploring nearby state parks rather than exclusive resorts. Yet in this simplicity, they discovered a richness that Ronan's previous wealth had never provided. Freedom from expectation allowed space for genuine joy. Mornings began with coffee on the porch, rather than market reports. Evenings ended with conversations about ideas rather than acquisitions. Weekends centered around community rather than networking. "Do you ever miss it?" Coraline asked once, as they prepared dinner together in their kitchen. "The penthouse, the power, the sterling life?" Ronan considered the question seriously, hands pausing in the act of chopping vegetables. "I miss the certainty sometimes," he admitted, "knowing exactly what was expected, even if I hated those expectations. And now I choose my path each day. That's worth everything I left behind." 5 years after the scandal, Willow Ridge celebrated its bicentennial with a festival that transformed Main Street into a living museum. Among the historical displays stood a small exhibit about the town's brush with corporate development and its unexpected champion. "Did you know he was a billionaire when you fell in love with him?" a teenage girl asked Coraline, who had volunteered to staff the exhibit. Before she could answer, Mabel from the diner interrupted from nearby. "That's not the story," she said firmly. "The story is that he stopped being a billionaire because he fell in love with her and with this town." Ronan, overhearing as he approached with lemonades, smiled at this simplified version of their complicated history. Yet Mabel had captured an essential truth. Their story had entered local legend not as a tale of deception and scandal, but as one of liberation and choice, of a man who discovered that true wealth couldn't be measured in dollars but in the courage to live authentically. As the sunset painted Willow Ridge in golden light, Ronan took Coraline's hand among their neighbors and friends. The empire was gone, but something far more valuable had taken its place, a life built on truth, strengthened by love, and rich with purpose.